Okay, let's look at a couple problems to review for our quiz on 7.1 through 7.3, which is on distance, midpoint formulas, circles, and parabolas. So this first question says, find the midpoint of a segment that has endpoints -4, 1, and 7, 8. So if you recall the formula for midpoint, it said that we just add the x's together, divide by 2, add the y's together, divide by 2, and that would make my ordered pair midpoint. So if I do that here, I do -4 plus 7 divided by 2, and it would be 1 plus 8 divided by 2. So if I take -7 plus 8, that's 3, so my midpoint would be 3 over 2. 1 plus 8 over 2 would be 9 over 2. So this would be my midpoint. And if you put those as decimals, that would be fine as well. Okay, question 2 says, find the distance between the 2 points. Now we had a different formula for distance. If you recall, distance was the square root of x1 minus x2 squared plus y1 minus y2 squared. So in this case, we have 2 points, and it doesn't matter. I'm just going to call this, maybe I'll label it x1, x2, y1, y2, but it doesn't particularly matter. So our distance is the square root. So we'll take the first x, which is 4, minus the second x, which is 12 squared, plus the first y, which is -2, minus the second y, which is -3. So we have 4 minus 8, which is -8 squared. We have -2 minus -3, which becomes plus here. So that's going to become plus 1 squared. So if we take this up here, this will give me the square root of 64 plus 1, which is the square root of 65. And you could try to simplify square root of 65, but it's 5 and 13, which are both primes, so there are no perfect square powers that come out, so this would be my distance. All right, let's move down to number 3. Number 3 says, write the equation of the circle below. Now, if you remember the circle equation, a circle equation written in standard form would be x minus h squared plus y minus k squared equals r squared, where h and k are the center, and r is, of course, the radius. So if we can find what the center of this circle and what the radius of this circle is, we'd be all set. So since we have a picture, I can kind of see where the center is. I can see where these two intersecting diameters would be. That's at this center here, which appears to be at 4, -2. And as far as the radius, I could pick a point on this circle, say here, and I could use distance formula. But since they're pretty easy, I can see it's 1, 2, 3. So I can see my radius is 3. So really I'm trying to find the equation of a circle with a center of 4, -2 and a radius of 3. Well, using this equation above, this is actually pretty simple. This will be x minus h, so x minus 4 squared, plus y minus k squared. Well, k is the second part of the center, so it's y minus -2, which is y plus 2. Remember, in the equation, the center coordinates are always the opposite. That's why it says -4 and plus 2, even though the center is 4 and -2. Equals r squared, which would be 3 squared, which would be 9. A great way to check that you've done this correctly would be to graph this new equation you have, put this in Desmos, and see if you get an identical picture to what we have here on our paper. All right, let's move to number 4. Number 4 has an equation, and we just want to find the center and the radius of the circle given this equation. Well, this is actually really very similar to the problem we just did above, because in this case we have the equation and we want the center and radius. Well, we said the center was in the x and in the y. It was hk, as you can see above, but it's always the opposite. So our center in this case, instead of being negative 3, 1, we'll just take the opposite. So it's 3 and negative 1. And again, this would be a really easy thing if you graph this, and if you put this in the Desmos, saw what you got, you get basically the same thing. Now radius, we want to know the radius. Now the radius is given by this number on the other side, but it is not 10. The radius is actually square root of 10, because remember this number is r squared. So if we say r squared is 10, when we take the square root, the radius is square root of 10. So radius of this circle is square root of 10. So we have this center and we have this radius. Okay, number 5 is definitely probably the hardest problem on this review as of yet. So let's write the equation of the circle in general form. We want to write it in standard form. This is in general form. So we want to write it where we can pick out the center and radius, where it looks something similar to what this equation looked like up here. This one obviously does not look like that. So we do this by using that process called complete the square. So what I would do first is I would take the number and I would subtract it to the other side. So that will give me negative 5 on the right-hand side. And then on the left side, I'm going to put everything that has an x next to each other. So that's x squared minus 4x. And everything that has a y, I'm going to put next to each other. So y squared plus 2y. And we're going to use this idea of complete the square to put this in standard form. So if I look at the x's, I look at the middle term, which is negative 4x. If I take half of negative 4, I get negative 2, and if I square that, I get 4. So I'm taking negative 4, I'm splitting it in half, and I'm squaring it. So it gives me negative 2 squared, which is 4. So I will add 4 to both sides. So if I look at this one, I have y squared plus 2y. So I will take half of 2, which is 1. 1 squared is 1. So what we get here is if I factor two numbers that multiply to 4 add to negative 4, this would be x minus 2 squared, plus y, two numbers that multiply to 1 add to 2 would be y plus 1 squared. In this case, this would equal to 0. So it really shouldn't equal 0 because you have a radius of 0, but the process remains the same. So your center would be 2 and negative 1. In this case, you have a radius of 0. So this would be a circle with no radius, so it would really be like a point. So you'd have like a little circle that has a dot. So like I show you on the quiz, the radius will not be 0, but the process you'd follow would be exactly the same. Okay, so let's look at some problems with some parabolas. So this says, what is the vertex and focus of the parabola y plus 6 equals x minus 2 squared? Okay. Now this one has the square on the x, so that means it's going to either open up or down, and our number over here, 3/2, means it's going to open to up because it's positive. So our vertex is always the opposite of the things in the x and y parentheses. So our vertex, and that's where it's going to open from, is going to be 2, negative 6. Again, you could also figure out what that value is by graphing it. So this one's a little tricky. We want to figure out what is the A value, which is our distance from our vertex to our focus. So right now we have a vertex at 2, -6, which is down here. And we know we have some parabola opens up because the square is on the y. We want to know where is our focus. Our focus will be somewhere in the parabola, somewhere up here. So this number 3/2, this is actually 4a. So we have 4a equals 3/2. So we have to figure out 4 times what equals 3/2. Kind of a tricky one, but we can simply divide both sides by 4. If you take 3/2 and divide it by 4, you will get 3/8. You can use a calculator, you could flip and multiply, whatever you want to do. 3/8, which is 0.375. So our distance from our vertex to our focus is this number. So let's add the 0.375, and since we're adding it in the up direction, we would be adding it to the y value. So instead of -6, we'd take -6 plus 0.375. So our focus would be 2, -5.625. And that's just because I added this number, and I added it up because you can see my focus is up above the vertex. So we got our vertex, we got our focus. Okay, let's look at our number 7. So let's write the equation of a parabola with vertex -1, 5 and focus of 2, 5. Okay? So I'm going to draw a little picture. So you got -1, 5, which is there. And then we got 2, 5, which is here. So this is my vertex and this is my focus. So we know the parabola is going to open somewhere up, or to the right, pardon me, because you got your vertex there. So I know my square is going to be on my y. So I'm going to have x with some part of the vertex, and then my 4a will go here. So my vertex is -1, 5. So when I put those in the x and y, it's the opposite. So it'd be x plus 1, because the opposite of -1 is plus, and y minus 5. So now all I got to figure out is how far is it, because A, remember, is how far is from the vertex to the focus. Well, how far is it from -1 to 2? Will be 1, 2, 3 units. So A is 3. So if I put A of 3 in there, 4 times 3 is 12. X plus 1 equals y minus 5 squared. So this would be my equation of my parabola that has the given vertex, -1, 5, and I can see that here. And then I figured out the distance to get to the focus, and that gave me A, and that's where that 12 factor comes from. Okay, let's look at our last one. This is a multiple choice question. Which equation is graphed below? So we got our nice vertex at the center here. It's opening to the left. So since it's opening right or left, I know the square is on the y, so I know it's not A and I know it's not B. So it's either going to be B or D. But this number, remember, when it's positive, it opens to the right, and when it's negative, it opens to the left. So in this case, this is actually a really easy problem. This would be just -8x equals y squared. You could, of course, also just graph these choices and see which one looked the best. But this one's not really very hard to deduce, just using a little bit of logic. All right, so these are just a couple quick questions to review for your quiz. You can obviously look at your notes and other materials as well to prepare yourself to take it.